Okay, so from activity 1, in a suitable location on your computer, create a folder which you're going to use to store all the files for your project. Call this folder DataWare Controls VS. Okay, so I'm going to make it in your pupils folder. So it's DataAware Controls VS. Okay. Right, activity 2. Okay, open up Access. And we're going to create a new database. Okay, so blank database. Okay, now we're going to create our tables, but we aren't going to use the GUI. So close the table that opens. We're going to make our tables using SQL statements. Okay? So you just got a blank database open. Okay? Right, so go to Create, Query Design. Yes? Maybe you're trying to create it in the wrong place. Okay, so I'm in my query design. I'm going to right click, go into the SQL view, and we're going to make our tables using create statements. Okay, I think we did this very briefly in grade 11. Okay, so I'm going to write create statements. So first of all, I'm going to do my first table, which is the runners table. So create table, we're going to call it runners. Okay. Open round brackets, close round brackets. Okay, so basically what you do is you list the names of your fields and their data types. So our first one will be the runner ID. Okay, guys, spelling is very, very important while we're doing this because it then links up later on when you've got your code and everything else. It'll match up one to one. Okay, so runner ID and its data type will be auto increment. Auto increment, that's an auto number. Okay, that's the way of saying that in SQL. Okay, then comma. Then I'm going to have first name, which is going to be a varchar of size 255. What's a varchar? It's a string of varying lengths up to a maximum of 255 characters. Okay? Then I'm going to do a surname, all right, which will also be a varchar of maximum size 255 characters. Okay, then I'm going to do date of birth. All right, which will be a date time. Weight, which will be double. And SA citizen, which will be of the data type bit. In other words, a single bit. But I'm using this for true or false values. Why would I use a bit for true or false values? Okay, Boolean and bit are actually identical. Bit because 0 would be false and 1 would be true. Okay. All right, and then you specify what the primary key will be. So primary key will be our runner ID. And don't forget your semicolon at the end of your SQL. Okay, hit run. and it should have made your runners table for you. Okay. Happy? Now leave that SQL there because we're going to need that for our documentation. We copy and paste it into our documentation later on. So make a new query. So create query design and go into the SQL view. And let's make the second table. So we're going to create a table. We're going to call it race results. All right. So the first field is going to be race result ID, which will be auto increment. And then I'm going to have runner ID, as a long. So runner ID is a foreign key in this table, huh? And I've made it data type long so it matches up with the auto increment. Auto increments are longs. Okay. So that's your runner ID. And then just have a look here, guys. In square brackets, I'm going to put date. And that will be a date time data type. Why do you think I've put it in square brackets? Okay, so I made a slight error in judgment when I first put this project together, and I called that field date. And date is actually a reserved keyword. So I've put it in brackets so that it doesn't think it's a keyword. Okay. All right, so then I've got distance, which will be a double, and placed, which will be a long. Okay, and then I specify what the primary key will be. So primary key is going to be race result ID. Okay, check your spelling, make sure that's all correct. All right, that's a capital E, that should have been a lowercase e. It all looks good to me. And semicolon in the end, if you want. Okay, are you happy so far? Okay, good. All right, and then hit run. And it should make your second table. Okay, so we're going to close these two queries. Okay, don't delete them, make sure you keep them saved because you're going to need those create statements for your documentation. Okay? Alright, so let's just go inspect our tables. And in our design view, okay, that all looks good. So basically we've got two tables, runners and race results. So what's the relationship? One runner can have many race results. Okay, and that's that primary key, foreign key relationship. So I think the field names are self-explanatory as to what they do, right? Yeah. Okay. This is the race result table. So there's the runner ID as a foreign key, the date that the race was run on, the distance the race was, and place. What place did they come in? First, second, third, etc. Okay, we're happy with that. All right, then go to File. Oh, sorry, before we do that, go to Database Tools, Relationships. Okay, show both your tables. And we want to create one is to many relationship between runners and race results and enforce referential integrity. So from race result, from runner ID, I drag across to the other the foreign key there, and I click enforce referential integrity, and then I click create. Okay, we happy with that? Sorry guys, I forgot to mention, cascade update and cascade delete should be selected. Do you know what cascade updates and cascade delete do? Okay, so basically, if you do an update in a child table, it will reflect back to the parent. Or if you delete something from, if you delete something from the parent, it will delete all the related records in the child table. Are we happy with that? Okay. So hit create. And it's complaining at me it couldn't lock the race results table, so I've got to close that. And try again. So enforce referential integrity, cascade updates, and cascade deletes. And create. Okay, so here's my relationships. Okay. Then go to File, Save. Okay. Let's just close that. I want to go to Save Database As. Save Database As, because I want to save it into that folder that I created. Okay. So I'm going to go save it into my project folder. Which was DataWare Controls VS. And I want to give it a specific name. Alright. I want to call it Running Club Members. And then hit save. Okay. Are we all happy with that so far? Right. The next steps we're going to be working in Visual Studio. You have to be quite careful. And when you do your own project, go through the steps very carefully, step by step, and try not to make mistakes along the way. Because if you make a mistake along the way, I've found out that it's actually tricky to reverse those mistakes. Okay. All right, so let's close this Access Database and open up Visual Studio. There it is. Okay, we all got it. So, new project, so File, New, Project. Okay. And what we want is we want to create a Windows Form application, but make sure the language is Visual C#. So check along the side here, when you've got new project, you've got your choice of languages. So you're going to choose Visual C# and a Windows Form application. Okay. And we're going to call our project, here where you've got the name, we're going to call it Running Club. Okay. And we're going to browse and change the location to our project folder. So browse, let's go find our project folder. Okay, which is that DataWare Controls VS folder. And then click Select Folder. All right. And then click OK. And it should create your project. And it might take a while. Okay, so you should see a page similar to this one. Right, so step 1. Click on the Data Sources tab in the top left corner of the screen. Over here, see where my cursor is? So click Data Sources. So if you don't have the data sources tab in the top left corner, you can go to View, Other Windows, and you can choose Data Sources. Okay, so I've clicked on my data sources, and I'm going to click on Add New Data Source. Okay, I'm going to choose Database and then hit Next. All right, and my database model will be a data set. Remember we talked about model view controller? So data set will be your model for your whole database. Okay, so I click Next. All right, and then it asks us which data connection should your application use to connect to the database. Okay, so we're going to hit New Connection, and the data source we're going to click Change, and we're going to choose Microsoft Access Database File, and then click OK. Alright, then it asks us for the database file name, so we click Browse and we go and find our database. Okay, which will be that one there in your Dataware Controls VS folder. Okay, click Open. Okay, don't worry about passwords because ours does not have any. And then click OK. Alright, then click Next. Right, at this point it pops up with this message. It says the connection you selected uses a local data file that is not in the current project. Would you like to copy the file to your project and modify the connection? Okay, this is a very important step. Okay, it's asking us whether we want to maintain a connection to the original file or copy the file into our project. Okay, now we want to so we've got to be careful because it means that no new data will persist in the database because a new copy is copied into the projects folder every time you run the application. So when you're running it and you try and run it again, in that compilation process, it actually copies a new copy of your database each time. So you would have saved data in your database application and then saved it and then wonder why it's disappeared. It's because the database is getting overwritten each time as it gets copied in from the original source. Okay. So we are going to choose yes, but very important is we're going to need to modify that behavior later. Okay. So we're going to choose yes, and then click. It comes up with a connection name for the connection string for us. That looks fine to me. And then I'm going to click Next. Okay, now it's going to ask me what I want to include in my data set. That's the model. So which objects from the database do I want in my model? Okay, so we're going to put a checkbox for tables because we want both tables in our data set. Okay, and then click Finish. Okay, it will take a while to work. So we should now see this screen here, the Solution Explorer and the Properties window with our form. Okay, so the form is what you see when your application is run, which you can drag and drop components onto. And the Solution Explorer on the right hand side here allows you to see all the files in your project. Now the Properties window displays all the attributes associated with whichever component you happens to be in focus on your form. Okay. Alright, so we're just going to click on our form here and we can start adding components using the toolbox. Do you see on the left hand side here I've got the toolbox? Okay. If you don't, what can you do to find it? Go to view, other windows, etc., and see if you can get it there. Okay. All right. Are we all ready to start building our form? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to start off with a tab control component. Okay. So under my toolbox, I'm going to look for tab control. There it is there. Okay. And I've got it select. I just have it selected. I don't have to drag it onto my form. I just have to have it selected. And then on my form, I can just draw it on. Okay. So do you see what a tab control does? Basically just gives us panels with tabs to click to go between them. Okay, I'm just going to make my form a little bit bigger. And I'm going to then resize it to fit my form. So I'm just going to drag it to the outside edges, like that. Okay. And that's what I have so far. Right, we are now on page 8. Okay. So by default it has 2 tabs, one called tab page 1 and one called tab page 2. All right. We want to add 2 more tabs. Okay. So right click on the control, and you should have an option there to add tab. So I'm going to add a 3rd one, and I'm going to add a 4th one. Okay. Now we want to change the display text of the tabs to something meaningful. Okay. So for the first one, so here I've got tab page 1 selected. Make sure you've got the area here, this blank area. Make sure that's selected. And then you see your properties window on the side. Those are all the attributes for that currently highlighted object, or component rather. So what I'm looking for is the text property. So I'm going to go look for the text property, and you see at the moment it says tab page 1. Okay. I want to change that to view all runners. Okay. And then I'm going to look for the name. If I scroll down, I should find the name somewhere. Right, where is the name? There's the name. The name is the variable name, guys. Okay, so the name is the variable name, and we want to give it a meaningful variable name, right? So that when we're dealing with our code later, we're going to be able to see which variables are which. Okay, so I'm going to change that, the name, I'm going to change to view all runners. Camel case, starting with lowercase letter. Okay. Right, and then for tab page 2, I'm going to select tab page 2, click in the empty area. I'm going to change the text to edit runners. And I'm going to go look for the name, and I'm going to change that to edit runners tab. Also camel case starting with a lowercase letter. Right, then I'm going to select tab page 3, click in the blank area, change the text for that to view all results. Okay. And then go look for the name attribute. And I'm going to change that to view results tab. Also camel case, first letter lowercase. Right, then I'm going to click on the tab page 4 tab, select the empty area here. I'm going to change the text to edit results. And I'm going to go look for the name attribute, and I'm going to change that to edit results tab. Okay. Right, so you should now have 4 tabs with correct names and correct variable names. Are we all on that step there? Okay, now under the View All Runners tabs, I'm going to choose View All Runners. In the blank area, I'm going to add something called a data grid view component. Okay, so I'm going to look for data grid view. Okay, so I'm going to add a data grid view component. That's over here. Again, you can just select it and then you can draw it onto your page. Okay. So I'm going to draw it under the View All Runners tab. Okay. And can you all look here quickly, guys? So you can see there it comes up with these options. Okay. So you're going to choose the data source for it. So under the drop down for the data source, okay, select the runners table. See there, got that selected. And it's now called the runners bounding source. Okay. If necessary, later on you can go and adjust that if you got it wrong. Okay. In the properties window for the data grid view. Okay. Uncheck enable adding, enable editing, and enable, sorry, we want to uncheck enable adding, and we want to check enable editing and enable deleting. Okay, because we're not going to use this data grid view for adding data. We're just going to use it for editing and deleting and for viewing. So I want adding is unchecked, editing is ticked, and deleting is ticked.
What about the edit runs tab?
Sorry?
What's the point of the edit runs tab?
Well,
There's a tab for editing runners, but you can just edit them and with view.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so please listen. So now under the properties tab, I'll have the data grid view selected, and then in the properties tab, I'm going to look for its name. Okay, so I'm going to look for its name attribute. There it is, and I'm going to change it from data grid view 1 to runners data grid view. Okay. Right, so I should have that data grid view now on my panel. Okay. And you see it's got the column headings. Okay. We are now on page 9. Do you see that the column headings, it's just used the field names from the database? Okay. We probably want something a bit more user-friendly than that, right? Okay, so we're going to right click on the data grid view component and then select edit columns. Okay, for each column we're going to change the header text to more user friendly headings. Okay, so for runner ID I'm going to look for the header text attribute. There it is, runner ID, and I'm going to rather call it runner ID. Okay. And then same for first name, instead of camel case, I'm going to have something a bit more user-friendly, first name. Surname, I'm going to change the header text, I just have to change the S to a capital. Date of birth, a similar thing. Change the header text to dates, to a capital D, sorry, and put spaces in between. And then for weight, give it a capital W. And then for SA citizen, capital S, capital A, with a space, and then citizen. Okay, and then hit OK. Right, do you see that your column headings are a bit more user-friendly now? Okay. Right, now we're going to move to the Edit Runners tab. So we go to the Edit Runners tab. Make sure we're in the blank area there. Okay. And we're going to add a label. Now this is very important. As part of the marks you get, okay, if we look in the rubric later on, you're going to see that there's marks allocated for having user-friendly variable names. That's why we're doing this. It gets a bit tedious, but we're making sure that we're changing every single variable name to something meaningful. Okay, so we're going to add a label. So under my toolbox, I'm going to find a label. And I'm going to draw that in over there. That's label 1. Okay. So make sure it's highlighted, and then under properties, go look for the text property, and the text will be runner ID. Okay. And then go look for its name. That's the variable name. I'm going to change that to runner ID label. Okay. Now I'm going to find a text box component. So I've got a text box component here, and I'm going to draw it next to my runner ID label. So I'm going to draw my text box in there. Okay. Don't worry about your positioning too much. We can fix it up afterwards. Okay, we can neaten that up. All right. So I'm now going to change the name property to runner ID text box. Okay. And then look for, it has a property called read only. Okay. So go look for its property called read only. And change that value to true. Okay. Why do you think I'm making that read only? Sorry? It's an auto number in the database. And it's a primary key. So I don't want the user interfering with it. Does that make sense? So first of all, the user shouldn't be able to enter an ID in there because it gets auto-generated. And it's a primary key, which we need to ensure that it's unique and generated by the database. So the user should not be able to adjust that value. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now I'm going to add another label. Okay. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to go to its text attribute, and I'm going to change it to first name. Okay. Then I'm going to go find its name property and change that to first name label. Okay. Now I'm going to add a text box. Okay. And I'm going to change its name to first name text box. Okay. Then I'm going to add another label. Okay. Like I said, don't worry about the positioning. You can fix it up later. Change its text property to surname. And then change its name to surname label. Okay, then we add another text box. And I'm going to change its name to surname text box. Okay. Now I'm going to add another label. Okay. And its text property. Its text property will be date of birth. Okay. And I want to change its name, its variable name to be DOB, date of birth label. Okay, happy so far? All right, now I'm going to add not a text box, I'm going to add a date time picker. So I'm going to add a date time picker. And I'm going to change its name property to be DOB date time picker. Okay, now I'm going to add another label. Okay, and I'm going to change its text property to weight. And its name to weight label. Then I'm going to add another text box. Okay, and I'm going to change its name property to weight text box. Okay, then I'm going to add another label. Okay, and this one is going to be, I'm going to change its text property to SA citizen, and I'm going to go and look for the name. I'm going to change to SA citizen label. Then I'm going to add a checkbox component. So I'm going to go find the checkbox component, draw it in next to that. Okay. Change its text property. Go look for its text property. And change that to yes/no. And then go look for its name property and change that to SA citizen checkbox. Okay. So our tab should now look something similar to this. Okay. It's not very neat at the moment, so I think we need to neaten it up a bit. Okay, so we just line up our labels nicely. Okay. Oh, I've accidentally gone into the code there. So just line everything up nicely with the edges and underneath each other. Okay. And we might need to just play around a bit, get everything lined up nicely. Try not to bunch everything too much. Can be a little bit tricky. It's actually a good idea to start with the components on the right. Yeah, how does that look? Have I got it quite right? Does that look better? Okay, so that's what our tab should now look like. Okay, and I'll stop for a bit to give you some time to. So we're now on the top of page 10. So this is now the more interesting stuff, okay? Because what we're going to do is actually bind our components together. So they'll be able to transfer data between them. All right, so we're going to click on the runner ID text box. That's that one there. Then in the properties window, okay, so look in the properties window. So I've got the runner ID text box highlighted. And then under the properties window, if I look for the text property, okay, under data bindings. So look for the data bindings heading. What am I missing? See here? Look where my cursor is. Okay. Do you see you've got the data bindings? Oh, hold on. Sorry. Just waiting for it to catch up there. Okay, are you all watching? So under the data bindings there, if I click on the plus, gosh, this is lagging a bit. You see it's got the text property there under data bindings. Okay, so I'm going to click on the text property and there's a drop down menu. Okay. So from the drop down menu, okay, I'm going to choose the runner's binding source. Remember that's the one we created. The runner's binding source. And I'm going to choose runner ID. Okay. Now we're going to follow the same process to bind the first name text box, the surname text box, and the weight text box to their respective fields in our data source. So if I click on first name, okay, under data bindings, the text from the drop down, I'm going to choose the runner's binding source, and then I'm going to choose first name. And then for surname, under the under the data bindings and the text, I'm going to choose the runner's binding source, and I'm going to choose surname. And then for the date of birth, for the date and time picker, under data bindings, now this one will be slightly different. Okay. I'm going to look for the value property, not the text property. Careful with this one. I'm going to choose the value property. And then from the drop-down menu, under the runner's binding source, I'm going to choose date of birth. Okay. And then for the weight, okay, under the data bindings tab, where's that? There you go. I'm going to change the text to come from the runner's binding source and the weight field. Then for the checkbox, I'm going to choose under the data bindings, I'm going to change, be careful with this one, look for the checked property, not the text. For a checkbox, we want to link the checked property. From the drop-down menu, select runner's binding source, and then the SA citizen field. And you see where my cursor is there? The check property. We got it? Okay, under the runner's binding source, you're going to choose SA citizen for that one. Okay. Right, are we all on the same page? Okay. Right, now I'm going to add a binding navigator. Now what the navigator does is it allows me to move between the different records in the table. Okay, so I'm going to look for a binding navigator in my toolbox, and I'm going to draw it onto my form. Now you'll notice that it puts it at the top of my form like that. Okay, if we don't want it there, we can sort that out later. Okay, so you should have all seen a control like this, similar looking control before, am I right? It's got the left and right arrows for you to go between records. Okay. So we're going to click on that component to have it highlighted. So we're going to click on it to have it highlighted. And then in the properties window, do you see where it's got the binding source? I'm going to change the binding source to be runner's binding source. Okay. Now we're on page 11, top of page 11. We're going to add a custom button to our binding navigator. Okay. So look carefully, please, otherwise you're going to miss it. In the binding navigator, look where my cursor is. If I click there, all right, I can choose to add a extra button, and then I'm going to select that. Okay. Click on the button to highlight it that we've just added. and then change its text property. Look for its text property and change it to save. And then look for the name property and change it to toolstrip save button. And then go look for the display style property. So I'm looking for the display style property and change it from being image to text. Okay, so your binding navigator should now look like that. If you all have a look, with an extra save button now. So what do you think the save button is going to be used for? Saving a particular record. Okay. Okay, now have a look there. What do you notice about my binding navigator? It's covering the runner ID, isn't it? Okay, so we need to reposition it. So select your binding navigator, okay, and then you need to change one of its properties in order to reposition it. So look for its dock property. Okay. Do you see it's got the dock property there? Change that from top to none. And that frees it up for you to position it wherever you want it. Are we happy with that? So we've undocked it, and we've now can position it wherever we want.